Hey, are you ready to grow your business? You have checked out the number one resource for business leaders, entrepreneurs, startup founders, and managers. And we're going to teach you how to grow and scale your business with real actionable steps. There's no fluff in this podcast. It's just good advice. Check out this episode. If you're a first-time listener, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. And if you enjoy this episode, leave us a 5-star review. Today's guest is Tony Minasale, who's the founder and CEO of SignalWire. It's the world's largest telecom platform. We're going to be talking about innovation today. We're going to be talking about entrepreneurship today. And more importantly, how do you be someone who you can see a need and let that fuel your next product or service? Tony's going to be sharing more about this, including his story and why SignalWire has become a backbone for modern communication applications like Amazon, Netflix, and Zoom. Stay tuned. Here comes your good advice. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Good Advice Podcast. One of my favorite things about the show is bringing to you people who not just understand entrepreneurship, but they've been in the entrepreneurial world, they've grown their own business, and they're out there making it happen. We bring you the real information, the real stories to the podcast so that you can know what to do with your own business. Today, we have Tony Minasale on the podcast. He's the founder and CEO of SignalWire, and we're going to be talking about his startup journey and how it has grown to be one of the world's largest telecom platform in bringing complex technology to real-time communication. We're talking about it today. Tony, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks.
How are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. It's nice out today.
Oh, yeah, it's funny. I've had people on the show from all over this week, and I've gone from people who are in like total heat waves to in like basically a monsoon. So it's nice to have someone on the show who is actually enjoying the weather these days.
Yeah, I'm in Wisconsin right now, and it's pretty good.
Okay, cool. Well, tell us a little bit about who you are and SignalWire and what you do.
So I'm the CEO of SignalWire. I've been working in engineering since the late 90s. I did a lot of work in the early days of the web hosting era when websites were taking off, dealing with like the server side of scaling and making websites possible to deliver to everybody. When we used to have a lot less tech back then. And then, I don't know, around the early 2000s, I started getting involved in communications because I was trying to build a product that revolved around call center, and I thought that I could use the internet, but I couldn't. And so then I got kind of obsessed with why I couldn't, and I spent a lot of time focusing on like why can't we use the internet like for reliable communications. So I've been working on that for 15 years. I started out doing an academic project called FreeSwitch, which is an open source platform I created kind of to solve some of my own problems as to why you couldn't build what I call software-defined telecom right away. There's some products out there and projects, and it was all kind of a good start, but it didn't really solve the problems that I had. So I put a lot of effort into trying to build that and created a movement for the enterprise, because of that. Several large enterprise things that use the internet now, companies that utilize, call center technologies and phone service over the internet, use a lot of that early technology that I worked on. In 2017, I created SignalWire with my co-founders in order to create, a more scaled, easy to use version of some of the tech that we had put together in the early times, harnessing all of that and making it easy to use. As we worked on this, the early work required some pretty pretty talented developers in very specific niche things, like understanding like protocols and C and the internet and a bunch of other stuff that is kind of hard to deliver to the world, at large, because there's a smaller population would actually want to focus on that much complexity. And so as we try and bring the technology up, we try and make it easier at every step. So, SignalWire is the goal of creating hyperscale around this tech so that you can embed and build any kind of live communication tool where the medium is the internet. So phone service, video chat, any other kind of stuff you might do that requires the internet.
I imagine, you talked about a little bit of your history and being involved with maybe even the early days of the internet. Is it exciting to see how much internet technology has changed over the last decade?
Yeah, a lot. Because right now also there's this whole work from home thing, and that was something I've done since 1995, pretty much. And it's evolved insanely since then. I had a dial-up internet. It would go so slow. It's 28.8 kilobits, and I'm trying to do work over it. And meanwhile, I have another phone line, so in case somebody calls me, there's no cell phones.
Right.
And all the ways, the first time an ISDN line happened, suddenly my internet was like a blazing 128 kilobits per second, and I thought that was all I ever needed. And then the cable modems came out. They're 1 megabit, and then 10, and then 100, now 300.
Now we got fiber.
Yeah,
fiber internet, and it's amazing.
We had Starlink and 5G, and that's really one of the things I was waiting for, because when I started building, during the time that I worked on my software technology, the internet probably 10x'd. But also now, just from like a year or two ago until 3 years from now, this little even smaller window, it's going to go just as much, it's going to 10x again. And then you have all these opportunities to do things. You won't be worried about trying to make the video work over small connections and stuff. We'll have low latency to everywhere. And that was kind of one of the last things that really is necessary to use the internet reliably for communication channels.
Surely there's a point of diminishing returns, right? Are we anywhere near that, or is there still plenty of innovation to happen?
With internet infrastructure?
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's first we can get the pipe to be a certain size, but then you have to scale it. So 5G theoretically gives you a gigabit to your phone, which is ludicrous. So no one's going to do it right away. So that gigabit will get saturated by all the people until they, in the back infrastructure side, they would keep trying to up that, but you'd be able to have some pretty decent interactions if you just had more so than just the speed. You want to have reliability and coverage, so that let's say you always get 20 megabits in both directions. It's not a ton, it's not what you have at your house, but it's to your phone, that's more than enough to have every call ever over video. You can call Walgreens on video every time you want to get your prescription refilled, or you want to have all of your phone calls go to the internet. So there's going to be a big shift between the infrastructure providers. Rather than trying to sell you phone service, they're going to sell you internet first. And then phone service is an afterthought, something you use your new amazing internet for. And then inside the house, everyone will probably have a gigabit as the lowest plan. And that's going to give you basically the same speed to a computer in the same room with one on the other side of the country, because you'll have, it's caught up a few times before. We used to have 10 megabit internet, and then we had 10 megabits on the internet and in the LAN. And then we started doing 100 megabit LAN. So then we had to wait for that to catch up. So then we can go 100 megabit to our computer across the room or to the internet. And now we're doing it with 300 and gigabit. Now there's 10 gigabit. So, it's always kind of a race between local area network speeds and wide area network speeds. But they're all past the line now for speed wise or amount of bandwidth. But the reliability and we would call latency being consistent, so that you can do as close to real-time communication as possible. Because even cell phones now are half a second delayed. You just don't realize it. I don't know if you ever called someone on a cell phone when you're near them, you can tell. But usually they're far away, so you don't notice. but that's still kind of a lot. A lot of people like to have no latency. It's pretty hard on the internet because there's a lot of redundancy you got to build in to make sure that packets make it there in time stuff. So it always causes some delay. And you don't want to remove that as much as you can.
So thinking about like the history of SignalWire, and we have this beast like the internet that's continually exponentially growing. I really appreciated your comment on working from home since the 90s. And I think what's interesting about COVID is we were plenty of businesses that said very openly, work from home work does not work, that remote work is not effective. And yet there have been companies, especially in the last 5 years, that are billion-dollar companies that are entirely remote. And so we've seen in the last year and a half, public perception start to shift where people are like, oh, I guess you can work from home. In the same way with the internet in the early 2000s, you had businesses that were saying things like, oh, in the late 90s, the internet's a fad. It's not going to stick around. It's not going to replace, how people actually find out about businesses. And, you're somebody who you've been on the cutting edge of both of those things. What's it been like being someone who is a bit countercultural to the established perception on what works, what doesn't work? I mean, do you consider yourself an innovative person, or what is that? Have you even thought about that, or what does that look like for you?
I'm definitely drawn to difficult stuff. So yeah, probably. I mean, I also like computers a lot, so it kind of went together. And computers being on a network, it just made it even better and more fun to do. And in the old days, it's the only way I could get to it, right? Like I have a lot of background with Unix. So I used to use the mainframe in the college I went to. The only way into it was dial up. It's the size of a refrigerator. You never get to see it in person. You just have like text terminals. So from the beginning, like if I wanted to use a computer, I have to call it over the phone, because I could get my little personal computer, but like I really wanted that Unix system. So I had to dial into it. So it kind of was the basis of realizing that I could do things over a network and far away and try and make it easier and stuff. But I think that, the distaste for remote work now that it's not forced on us is partially real estate related. Like imagine how much money will be lost if you don't lock people in a giant building all the time. And suddenly you don't have to pay for it. Imagine the people losing all the money if they don't need buildings.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that, but also because it's hard to manage people remotely if you don't have practice at it. But I would say being an engineer type, us developer type people are just always done this. That's not new. The persona that kind of a software engineer is like a guy with the backpack. Sits down and pulls it out anywhere. Like, I'm at anywhere the internet works, which is getting even more remote and whatever. But like, I could sit at a table in a coffee shop. I can go to the beach. I could go be in my own living room.
Yeah.
So those things are like normal for that kind of person because developers, we have this conference every year in Chicago. The next one's coming up in October. And when you just get the crowd there, it's just a sea of laptops. They all brought their entire office on their back and they're all just sitting there. So developers have already figured out how to remote work their whole life. So you have these like men and women that sitting there typing and they don't care where they are. They can tune, they put headphones on and they're just like, it's actually fine. But when you think of like sales or something like that, or maybe like any other areas of the company, like marketing or that kind of stuff, where you used to like imagine them sitting at there's a bunch of really nice computers and you're sitting on a like high top table talking to each other while you're like making cool graphics or whatever. Like that one's a little harder to get remote. But we've had practice at that too since we started SignalWire. So one of the ways we did that was to build, using our own technology, a virtual work environment where we have basically always on video with like several different rooms that you can see. So as you work during the day, you have this kind of video experience typical of what you might expect, where there's like a room with people in it. But it starts to allow you to look at what everyone else is also doing and join them in real time. So like if I was here in my room with you right now, and I decided I had to go talk to somebody else that I was waiting for. If I saw them in a room, I just click the room and I'll jump in there. So that's one of the ways that we took the concepts of telephony, the idea of how, like, I'm calling you and now I'm transferring and I'm putting you on hold, like all those things you think about with a phone, and like marrying it together with like what you might expect out of like Google Hangouts or something. So that instead of just being like two different things, it's really just the way phones have evolved. So in our own use case, that allows like our marketing team, our product team, our engineers, everybody has their own kind of little space and they can go and join each other when needed. And we have more of impromptu meetings and stuff. And that makes it easy. And sometimes they want to see each other in person. They live kind of far away in some cases, but a lot of them are sort of close, so they can drive and meet each other once in a while. There's not like a sentence to have to work from home just because you're not working in an office. I think that's a thing that's been conflated a lot lately because we get locked into this paradigm of it's coronavirus. So now I'm trapped in my house and that's the only reason it's useful to work over my computer. But if you think about it, like everyone just goes to sit in a different place and sit at their computer instead. So it's a difference where they are as long as they have discipline to continue to reduce work and whatnot.
In a time where so many businesses are trying to innovate, including people who are listening to the podcast right now, who are thinking about how do I leverage technology to the benefit of even not just my business, but maybe even what I want to offer in terms of my next product or service. Sometimes it feels like people have really great ideas, but either the technology as a whole isn't there yet, or it's just not the right time, so to speak. So one example would be something like YouTube, where YouTube wasn't the first business or service that thought of YouTube. But the history of YouTube, it came about at exactly the right time that the internet, whether it was like the codecs or whatever it was, as the internet was developing with the browsers, were able to partner well with YouTube. So how much have you found it be reliant on good timing or the luck of when you decided to build something? How much of that is in play when it comes to the innovative process?
I think the timing is important. That YouTube example is pretty much like the standard of like missing the boat or being too early for the boat. It's very important. You can't deliver real-time video over the internet to everybody when you can't even fit the video can't play because you don't have enough bandwidth going to everybody. So that was the same problem that I'm talking about, only even sooner, because it's a lot more simple to buffer video, and download it to only watch it. But when you're talking going both directions, it's even worse because a lot of times our internet is slow going the other way. They tend to make it asynchronous because most of the time they figure, the upload direction is only for requests and it's not that big and you don't need much. They had to start doing a little more because gamers now have like games that go both directions, but they really put a lot of effort on only the inbound for a long time. And now they're just starting to deal with both directions. So that's one of the key things. In our case, since I put a lot of effort into the technology itself, trying to make it more resilient by working under crappy internet conditions was good practice. But in the case of timing, I sort of waited, for the timing. 'Cause one thing is when you work on technology just for the sake of working on it, like I did with my open source stuff and tried to create a movement around getting developers to build things, it's not a business. So it isn't necessarily like we had a small consulting company, but it wasn't like a large shot, like we're not swinging for the fence with it. So if it's like all or nothing kind of thing, it's possible to maintain, keep working on the technology and wait for the timing to be right. So I think that time is important. And I probably waited a good several years, from when the idea first came to my head of some of the stuff I want to build. Like some of it is so monumental that I could work on it before I even put people around me. So I have a smaller team that I would work on some of this tech with at the lowest level and kind of without any distractions. Handful of people, like less than 10 people. Then we start SignalWire, and now we're going to bring in, we're up to 70 now, so it was during that time when all you're doing is working on the tech, it's a lot easier to kind of wait for the stars to align. And there's a lot of work to be done. So now it's like kind of bringing all those pieces together anyway.
How do you stay patient in that whole process? Because you mentioned yourself, sometimes it takes several years. I mean, a lot of times, especially in the startup world, or people who are creating something, they're so excited about the fruition of taking it to market. How do you stay patient in that?
I don't know how I did it, because I'm not very patient if you asked others about being impatient. But somehow in that one aspect, I've been working on just the technology stack, the one piece of our company that I had worked on even earlier than the company started. That's, I think we're at year number 16 now. So I've been spending 16 years on the same software project. And so I guess it's just so big, eventually it kind of, it's not Crazy Horse. I'm not that patient. I go get some dynamite and right now, like, instead of doing it by hand or whatever. Sure. But it kind of is like that in the software sense, because it's like, 15 years to build software. Maybe it could be faster. You could say, oh, what if you just get like $100 million and hire a bunch of people to do it for you and stuff. But it's like not necessarily going to work, because you need the feedback from the world evolving around it as well, because it's kind of other drivers of the technology are the internet, people's willingness to use it, the shift, the paradigm of cloud compute. When I started my stuff, I had to put it on a server somewhere. There was no AWS or anything. And, people now can start building stuff that way. And so we had to kind of transition to that, and being able to run software in a virtualized environment in a real-time program is a lot harder than, say, like a web server. Like, you wouldn't even know how fast or slow a web server is as long as it works. And like, there's no two-way communication issues with it. But some software, like the ones we use, latency, like I said, is critical, and you need to compute to timing off of the computer and a bunch more stuff no one cares about hearing from me right now. But just virtual computers do not perform the exact same way real ones do. So there's a lot of forgiving stuff you have to put into your software to tolerate it.
Well, obviously you're committed to SignalWire. What's next for the business? I mean, what are you looking at a year from now, even maybe 5 years from now? Where does the business go from here?
So we started out building what you would call the kind of table stakes gateway service, because one of our goals is to create an internet first mentality for communication. So right now we have a PSTN first. PSTN is what nerds call phone network. It's just like 10-digit dial numbers to each other, like Mom Bell's phone lines and all that kind of stuff. So we still have that. We have mobile now, but a lot of it gateways back into that same old stuff. So you're going in and out of this 1970s equipment all the time, every call you make. In order to tolerate that, we had to, take some of the tech that we worked on in the early part of our project to deal with phone numbers still. Like, oh, I want to call a phone number. And then it comes into us over, we turn it into software through a gateway, and start trying to do stuff with it. So we built this whole network where you can say, build your own voice menus, things that were a long time ago that were pretty hard to do. You would imagine you're going to go pay like 10 grand for some box that just answers calls and asks you to press 1 for sales or that kind of stuff. But, throughout the work that we've done over the last decade and a half, we can now write that as like simple couple lines of code in some scripting language that people like to use. You can make those kinds of things now. You don't have to have like specific device for it anymore. And getting all that table stake stuff was the first thing we did, so that we'd have ways to manipulate and control the original kind of phone calls interface. So you can put phone numbers, receive calls. You can make contact centers or voice menus and that kind of stuff. And then we decided to work on then supplementing that with video. So same stuff, but also with video, so that you could build and create, instant embed experiences in your website. So you can have sales people just appear in your website when you call. You go in and say, I need help, and the call center just appears right in the browser. So working on a bunch of that stuff, making that really easy to build. So not just the technology itself, like there's lots of complicated reasons of how we got that technology. Some of it is from stuff that we worked on directly, and the rest of the world helps with it, and Google and everybody else contributes like large pieces to that capability. But then putting it all in a normalized container, so you can just go, I want to build something and it's really fast. So that was one of the next goals. And then like long term is one of the problems we want to solve is real-time bidirectional broadcast that is like close to zero latency as possible. Right now we have a lot of broadcast stuff, like gamers going on Twitch and all that kind of stuff. It's using a very antiquated protocol that came back from the days of Flash, and we finally have eradicated Flash from our lives, but the protocol that Flash uses remains, and it still has like a 30-second delay. So if I broadcast video, everyone else is seeing it 30 seconds later, and there's a lot of reasons why that's bad. That timing could be important. Let's say we're watching a football game, and then if we're watching a football game together and then I have a sports app on my watch and it tells me the touchdown happened, I didn't even see the guy hike the ball yet, then it gets kind of weird. And that removes a lot of cool stuff you could do, or being able to watch stuff in real time with other people and be able to talk and have them hear what you said right away and vice versa. So doing that in a small scale is already super hard, but now we want to do it to the nth degree, like as many as possible, maybe even into the millions, and being able to reduce that real-time latency amount, so that you could broadcast stuff and people are actually seeing it live and not like crazily delayed, not like 30, 40 seconds, and get it down to like 1 or less than a second or 200 milliseconds, something like that.
It blows my mind where technology can go, especially this conversation of latency, because I'll have the sports app and realize, it gets kind of spoiled for you. It's like, the touchdown or the interception happened, and you're like, okay, I guess I'll watch it happen now. That is really interesting. And like I said, it just blows my mind where technology goes from here. And it's very exciting. So Tony, I wish you well. This has been a great conversation, and it's so interesting to think about where technology goes from here. Not only do I wish you well, I wish SignalWire well. Is there anything else you want to tell the audience in terms of how to stay engaged with you or SignalWire, or really what the next steps are?
Well, SignalWire is a pretty welcoming place. You can just go sign up for it. There's nothing, it's not like you have to buy something, but obviously you do if you start building products, but you can go try it out and get to know us with very little commitment. So I'd say visit our website and come and hang out.
All right. Tony, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Hey, for our listeners, I'm going to put the website, signalwire.com, down in the episode description below. And if you've been following the podcast, what the heck are you waiting on? Click that subscribe button so you keep getting good advice wherever you are. And don't forget, if you enjoy the podcast and you want to support the podcast, you can do it at our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice, where you can even get your business advertised on the podcast in the introduction. Again, that's at patreon.com/goodadvice. Hey, we so appreciate you. That's today's good advice. We'll catch you later. See ya.